Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Research Revolution Day 2. Please join me in welcoming to the stage at this time, Chad Garrett with Florence Healthcare.
Good morning. I was trying to decide how many people would not show up this morning after the party. Did everyone have a good time last night? I literally watched Bamboozled up here, and I was kind of floored at the energy and the competitiveness that I thought we couldn't top that. And then I'm sitting there last night at the party, and the comedian's doing his thing, and there's about 20 people sitting in chairs, and like no one's laughing, but they're all very intently staring. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. My favorite joke was he said essentially that he was inspired by today's technology world, and he decided to be a fractional boyfriend. I was like, that's pretty good. Anyway, good morning. Thank you for being here. It's tough. We're starting 30 minutes before we started yesterday. Ryan, our CEO, and I were talking, and we decided that we should have flipped that the other way, considering there was a party, but thank you for being here. Well, look, today's very special for me. I'm a technologist from Silicon Valley. I spend a lot of time with a company called AWS. You may know them as Amazon. And before I get to our keynote speaker, I want to announce that our company, Florence, has a press release at the wire 8 a.m. this morning where AWS and Florence have now partnered. We are now on AWS's marketplace. Thank you. If you don't know what marketplace is, it's essentially a marketplace where companies that really lean into AWS from a technology standpoint on their IT side of their business, where they can essentially do business, transact business. It's important for our platform to be on there to make it more accessible. And as companies lean into AWS and get better discounts and more commitments in their relationship with AWS, the marketplace makes it really easy to transact business with us. So since I'm on the commercial side of the business, and it's our job to reduce friction and make it easier to work with our clients, this is great news for us. But also, I think it legitimizes technologically what we're doing, since our platform is completely deployed in an AWS platform. Not trying to get techie on you, but these are really, really big pivotal points in our history. So we're really proud of that. Speaking of being proud, AWS is also leaning in with us today. They're doubling down on Florence and our ability to work with all of the deployed sites, all the trials we're working on, all the hard work we've done the last 10 plus years and that side. And then also they have really big relationships with the biggest of pharmas, and they need help as well. They're not experts in clinical trials. We are. And the partnership is definitely mutual. So I think what you'll hear on the stage is some of those things. Our CEO, Ryan, will be doing a quick session here after the keynote, and the two will exchange some ideas and talk about what's happening in the industry. But we'll probably highlight some of the things that AWS is doing to really invest in Florence, which is, again, a lot of really exciting news. So having said that, we're going to start very strong with today's keynote. We're going to explore the cutting edge AI technologies being exploited, leveraged, and used by your peers in the industry. I don't want to steal any of the thunder from our speaker this morning, Doug Stover from AWS. Please welcome Doug to the stage.
Good morning and welcome. Yeah, it's working. Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the revolution. So the agents are coming. Actually, 250 years ago, Paul Revere wrote, said the British are coming. It's now the agents are coming for the revolution. I'm Doug Stover. As Chad mentioned, I work for AWS. I'm a life sciences business development lead. And what that enables me to do is have the opportunity to work across a lot of our partners and organizations and understand across the value chain of life sciences the work that we're doing. We also get to understand the challenges that organizations are facing, the jobs that need to be done, and truthfully, what is the art of the possible. What I can tell you is in the last year, they aren't coming, they're already here. In fact, last week, Anthropic announced Claude for Life Sciences. If any of you are familiar, this was announced. It is an agent specifically developed for research and development within life sciences. It allows the organizations that are working with it to plug in services like Benchling, PubMed, as well as 10x Genomics. So it allows the researcher to really expand their search. So the agents are here. What I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today is why are we seeing the rapid growth? What's driving this? I think sometimes it's important to level set and say, what is an agent? And then we've got a couple of case studies from some of the larger organizations we've been working with, but to give you a better sense of how are companies and how is the industry adopting this technology. So there has been an exponential growth in data. Demands AG suggests that in 2010, there was about 2 zettabytes of data being produced worldwide. They project by the end of this year, it will be 181 zettabytes. So a show of hands, how many people here know what a zettabyte is? Got a couple. Great. For those of you who don't, that's a zettabyte. It's 1 with 21 zeros. To provide a little bit of context, what's great about this is at the turn of the century, we, as an industry, coined big data, right? Big data was a gigabyte. There's 1 million gigabytes in 1 zettabyte. So just to give you a sense of how much it's exploding. And the data is the critical element because that's what allows us to train the agent, to train the service itself. So if we go back to this slide for a moment, what's interesting is that within healthcare alone, the IDC suggests that healthcare is generating, by the end of the year, will generate about 10.2 zettabytes, and it's growing at about 36% per year. In addition to that, the American Heart Association suggests that a patient will represent about 80 megabytes, and a hospital about 50 petabytes. These are all numbers that are just well outside of reasoning for us to internalize. But what's interesting about those data points from the American Heart Association is they don't include claims, they don't include trials, and they don't include wearables. And I can tell you this watch collects more data than I even know what to do with, and it's generating data every day. So really what we're seeing is that the data explosion is making the adoption of agentic agents and AI possible. So recently this year, we had an opportunity to do some work with Bain to explore how organizations were viewing in healthcare and life sciences, how they were viewing technology, how they were making the adoptions. We interviewed executives across payers, providers, and manufacturers. And what we found was 95% of them truly believed that in the next 3 to 5 years, and now sooner, it was going to disrupt the industry. But more importantly was the data to the right of it, which suggests that most felt that generative AI was going to absorb more of their budgets than traditional IT. So they were placing bets. In fact, they had big aspirations and expectations that in the next 3 to 5 years, they were going to see AI that would transform how we diagnose and how we treat patients. They will see it as how it will drive FTE costs, reduce administrative burden, and more importantly, it's going to drive a majority of the new therapeutic discoveries. What's interesting is that it's only been about 6 months since this research was done, and we're already seeing these things happening now. So the speed of change is happening faster than even the leaders were able to predict. It just continues to move on a flywheel. When we take a step back and we think about this isn't the first software revolution for our industry, right? We had electronic medical records. It took about 12 years to see them actually penetrate the market. Then if we take a look at the AI scribe, it took about a year. Now, I think it's fair to say that obviously electronic medical records bear the brunt of institutional knowledge and being adverse to change and everything else we can think about. But in reality, what's interesting around this newest is the newest revolution, if you will, is the amount of uptake, the speed. And it's also thinking about the fact that these folks are willing to try and buy at a much faster clip than they ever have been. So I think we need to stop for a moment and say, well, what's an agent, right? And so let's level set the conversation. An agent in AWS's world is an autonomous system that leverages AI to reason, to plan, and complete tasks for humans and or systems. Agents work best in an iterative environment. They don't work as well if you have a straight line process. They work very well when they have iterative problems to solve, which makes them perfect for research and development within life sciences. And by the way, they're exploding. This is personally, I love this slide. I've showed it to a colleague of mine, and he looked at it and he said, I have no idea. Where should I be looking? And that's the point. There's literally been an explosion of agents over the last year. Everything from biomarker identification and drug design to real-world evidence and clinical trials, content creation, market access, market research, you name it, across the value chain, there are agents. CB Insights, if you're familiar, is an organization that tracks a lot of the startups. Their most recent report had about 70 companies within clinical development alone. Of those 70, 80% had an AI platform. So there's a tremendous push into this space. And it's in the headlines too. So all we have to do is watch the news. You have Triley AI, they have a seed round of 4.7 million for Margo, which is patient recruitment. You have Flagship, which continues to bet on AI as they spin out new companies and new assets. You have Caidya forming a partnership, Graph AI with drug safety platforms. The news is basically tracking the amount of money and the amount of investment that's being poured into agents and to AI itself. But it's really important today that we begin by recognizing that it all starts with the data. And this is a perfect example, the iceberg. The sizzle's at the top. Generative AI is what everybody talks about. That's the excitement. But in reality, it's what's below the waterline. That's what matters. It's the data that's your strategic asset. That's where you find the foundational models, the analytics, the piping, a lot of the work that Florence does. That's where this happens. That's what drives AI. So if below the waterline, your house isn't in order, you may have a great proof of concept, but it won't scale. You may be able to introduce a capability into your organization, but it won't be picked up because it's not going to generate the right results. Which is why we'll start with the first use case, which is around the modern data strategy. So it's very important that, as I mentioned, your data is in order for the agent to actually accomplish the task. So clinical trials are complex. No one in here needs to be told that. They're messy. At a 50,000-foot level, they're extremely clear and they're linear. You go from design and planning to close out. Here's the steps. If you look under the cover on a Friday afternoon or a Monday morning, right? It's information moving back and forth, people connecting, reconnecting, pushing data back and forth to each other. We were engaged by a top 10 pharma specifically because they believed that their system was no longer, it was redlining. They didn't believe it was going to be able to maintain itself, and with the additional complexities of the trials, that they were going to be able to continue to advance and drive the insights fast enough to make the decisions. So when we went in and started to kind of take a look and do a little bit of that pre-work, some of the things we heard was, well, our infrastructure looks like spaghetti, our architecture. We have data silos, we have overlapping redundancies, we have on-prem capabilities where the data is not moving. We essentially cannot get access to the information and make the decisions fast enough. In fact, one individual mentioned during an interview that they have 100 people that just watch data go back and forth every day. They had a legacy system that had been developed about 10, 15 years ago, and they continued to advance and add and bolt on capabilities to it. They would add best of breed technology. They would make changes. What they ended up with was Frankenstein. And Frankenstein was working fine for the time being. But they believed they needed to create a modern data platform that would connect clinical, it would connect regulatory, quality, as well as safety information, and bring them into a seamless data platform that would allow them to make those transactional and analytical decisions at a rapid pace. They also recognized as well that technology is only the beginning. I think we all know whenever you introduce a change into your organization, it's not just introducing technology. And in the case of this organization, they wanted to arrive at a single data platform, a data mesh that would allow them to absorb and ingest data, harmonize it from multiple sources, make that data so that internally they could pair it with their internal data and make rapid decisions. The key around the clinical trials for this organization, and they were running up to 300 of them at the time, was how fast can I make decisions so that I do not continue to invest in something that I think is not going to be profitable? How do I make those decisions at a rapid pace? How am I ingesting data from all of my external vendors and partners, and how am I making heads or tails of it inside with what I already know? The challenge here was they had tremendous institutional knowledge, and they had legacy systems they needed to overcome. There was a change management element to it as well. And so they had to work through breaking down the culture of silos. They had to think about folks becoming data stewards instead of data wranglers. They had to think about the governance elements. They had to begin to eliminate some of those redundant and repetitive tasks, which in many cases also follow by a reorg. Because as we build up workarounds, we build up capabilities, people, processes that are meant to absorb or work through the challenges. In order to make this transition, it was becoming more of a transformation for the organization. And they did. So they were able to transition from a redundant platform that had on-premise and multiple systems and physical locations to something that was more streamlined. What was interesting about this migration as well was, in addition to the mesh at the top that allowed them to ingest data from multiple vendors, so they were able to work with their partners and work with them efficiently and quickly, was that they had agile programs underneath. They had modular capabilities within. And the reason that was really important to this client, and as we are seeing with all of our clients, technology is moving too fast to build something that is set in stone. To have the modular capability would allow us to move capabilities in and out as the technology changed without disrupting the system. Which brings me to the next use case. So the workloads and the capabilities within life sciences are extremely complex. The workloads and insights, they're extremely complex. They're more complex than a single agent has the capability. Even if you load additional data into it, a single agent doesn't have the ability to iterate through the workloads of life sciences in many cases. So over the last year, we've started looking at multi-agent architecture, which is really important when we think about what's happening. We were approached by a client that recognized that the systems today were not going to enable them to continue to move as fast as they wanted, speed always being a critical element here. But it was also the fact that in order for them to understand the success of an existing trial, they would have to go to multiple areas of the business and query those databases to understand the success of that specific trial. So imagine an individual going, and I'm sure you can, going to each piece of the business, asking them a series of questions, compiling a dashboard, having it in PowerPoint, and bringing it back to the executive team saying, this is the status of the existing trial. Well, that wasn't going to work for this company. They wanted to create a multi-agent architecture so that each query could then work across the different databases. So no longer did the individual have to be a data analyst. They didn't have to be trained in computer science to be able to query. They just needed to understand the prompt. And it was a natural language prompt, which means you or I could go and just ask a question. And in this case, you would ask the question of the data assistant, which then would break it apart, determine, well, which of the sub-agents which have a special question for me? And more importantly, which of the sub-agents, what's the order that I want to be able to engage them with? So it's not enough that I'm able to ask the question. That supervisor agent actually has the capability to think, okay, well, where within the organization would I find that information? And if I found it, what would I tell? So here's an example. I'm a data science director looking for insights on this study. I want you to indicate what might be the potential problems in the trial. And I'm interested in whether the study is delayed, what are the screen failure rates, and any other important clinical insights. List the 5 issues and include 5 potential recommendations. And within a minute or two, it came back with this answer. This is the state of the current trial. It's delayed by X months. Here's the 5 reasons why we think it is, and here's the 5 recommendations. These aren't the answers. I mean, they are. But an individual, a human who's in the loop, still has to actually execute this. But imagine that rather than me running around to each part of the business and understanding, well, where are we with the sites? Where are we with the patient recruitment? How are we doing? And just being able to ask one question and get the results back in minutes, and then know exactly where I needed to go organizationally to have that conversation. Another example, when you build on top of a modern data platform, and this was another top 5 pharma or top 10 pharma as well, they wanted to be able to scenario plan when they were putting together their protocols and building the study design. They wanted to understand, they started making decisions, what would be the impact of those decisions? What were the risks? What were the opportunities? What were the rewards? And then at the same time, could I set it up so that as I initiated the trial, would it monitor and look for signals and tell me, hey, by the way, we're going to scenario 1, 2, or 3, and this is what it's going to look like. So the intelligent systems decision system was basically a series of layers where they digitized the processes in a computational twin. So they essentially created a computational twin of the study and they tested it. They ran different scenarios against it. What happens if I can't recruit enough patients? What happens if the patients aren't, they're dropping out? How do I begin to understand so that I can make corrective actions earlier, right? So once again, it's a human in the loop. The system isn't actually going to execute on this. The system is actually going to inform the individual, we need to make changes here, here, and here. So it's actually accelerating the business. It is bringing the insights to the individual at a faster clip. So it is actually taking the inefficiencies out of the organization. And the last one that I'll introduce you to here today is around real-world evidence. So yesterday I was in Washington, D.C. With Datavant for their real-world evidence partnership, and they had a conference where we unveiled a new product that I'll let you all in on a secret. We'll talk about it at reInvent in a couple of weeks, which is our large annual event in Las Vegas. If you can go, trust me, it's a fantastic experience. But real-world evidence itself is really essentially becoming a flywheel. It's being generated through health records, claims databases, wearables. All that information is now we're seeing being used in development and approvals. It's being used in creating control arms in clinical trials, and then post-market surveillance as well. So we're seeing the flywheel. The challenge with real-world evidence today, if any of you operate in that space, is that it's fragmented. So when you are thinking about clinical trials and the evidence that you're collecting, it's very structured. You know exactly what you're collecting. You have, these are the protocols. That information is much cleaner, and real-world evidence and real-world data is exactly just that. It has holes. So when you acquire real-world data, in many cases, about 40% of the time, it's incomplete. And many times you need to be able to connect different data sets to be able to build a complete picture of a patient. So social determinants of health against their electronic medical records, against any of the other wearable data you may be collecting. How are you connecting all of that? And the discovery is also a challenge. In addition to once you've acquired it, how long does it take you to harmonize that data, right? So data does not come in the door the same from every source. So there's a process that happens, it can be up to 4 weeks, where you actually have to harmonize the data so that you can overlap it. So Datavant, if you're not familiar, they are focused on tokenization. And tokenization allows you to link disparate data sets together and overlap them. And by overlapping them, you can begin to understand, okay, this is the same patient. It's all de-identified. It's anonymized data. That's what the token does. But the token allows you to connect the same token to the same token. It's a proprietary capability they've developed, and they have quite a few providers as well as manufacturers and payers that are engaged in this space. By building a clearinghouse, the intention is to take something that takes 4 to 16 weeks, and how do we reduce the time? So Datavant Connect, powered by AWS Cleanrooms, essentially is going to bring data consumers and data producers together. What you see in the middle is an agent that is being developed today and will be ready for the market in Q1 of next year. What the agent allows you to do, if you're a data consumer and you know exactly the parameters that you want to buy, you go into the agent and you say, these are the parameters, this is the therapeutic area, this is the patients, these are the biomarkers I'm interested, and all the different parameters you're interested in. The agent will then go and look across the databases and pull forward the relevant information. So the relevant producer data, the EMRs, will be pulled forward, and then you have the ability to trust and verify. Try before you buy. Part of the challenge today when we acquire real-world data is you buy it, and it's kind of like a kid on Christmas morning. You buy it and you open it up. Could you imagine if the toy was only 60% complete? Open up, great. I didn't get what I ordered. This allows you to actually buy and understand, and then you make the purchase of the data. The other important part here is the data never leaves. It doesn't move from the system. This is all built on the AWS platform. So the data is not moving. When you're evaluating it in the clean room, you're not losing, it's not subject to any concerns with respect to PII. And essentially what it is going to do, and what we're seeing it do already in early tests, it's reducing the real-world discovery and evidence generation down to about 2 to 4 weeks. So remember, a process that could take up to 4 months is now down to a month at the longest. So it's a streamlined data discovery. So using that agent, I'm able to query what are all the different possible data sources that are available from the producer side. I'm able to then do the rapid insights generation because through AWS and the harmonization, I'm actually able to take the data, do the overlapping connections and link it. And now I'm understanding what I'm looking at. And then in working with organizations like Aetion and Penalgo, you can actually arrive at the insights generation. Soup to nuts, 4 weeks at the most. And that's what's coming, and that's what's on the horizon. So that's kind of the prepared thoughts that I had for today, and I know Ryan's going to come up on stage as well. So thank you.
And what a great contrast to some of the clinical operations wonk topics that we had yesterday. Here from the other side of the universe and starting from the technology side, working back instead of the clinical operations side working forward. I think we did you a disservice. We're lucky that you have real pharma chops. You started your career at UCB and then was part of the team at Alexion when Alexion was acquired by AZ. And when you're at UCB, you were doing patient experience and patient data applications. So he's one of us, even though he has the type of expertise from the cloud and from AWS Bedrock that is different from what we experience every day. Give us a little context on your background. How have you seen the pace of innovation change today and the types of innovation that's occurring versus when you were focused on patient experience applications a decade ago?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I mean, they're two very different lenses, but starting with patient experience, the challenge for us was we wanted to understand the patient journey. And in order to do that, we needed to collect data on the different breakpoints, where the patient was engaging with the system, what was happening, and they were disparate systems. And so we were working through a lot of the challenges that we're now just benefiting from today. We were trying to understand how do you connect disparate data sets. We were talking to DataVan 10 years ago. Tokenization was already on the horizon, but it was early. And so part of the challenge for us was not only was the technology ready, but I think was the organization ready. So the organizations had been built with a different purpose in mind. And so what we were asking the organization to do was change the way you engaged with the end user. We wanted to, obviously we were a thorn in the side of regulatory and compliance all the time. And what we ended up doing in order to change that was we actually brought them into the meetings early. So we figured if they had blood on their hands from the very beginning, they couldn't challenge us in the end.
I heard a groan.
Yeah, I apologize. We just brought them into our little.
Halloween's Friday. It's not yet Halloween.
Yeah, it was a very big tent, and we welcomed everybody. But it was an interesting experience. And so then when you step out and you move to AWS, and having that point of view of seeing across multiple organizations and seeing where they all are in that change cycle and understanding the challenges that they're facing. I mean, obviously the technology has changed, and the technology is making some of these, what we at the time thought was impossible. It's now the art of the possible, and it's happening. I think that vantage point has made it very unique.
So you gave a couple of remarks, a couple pointers during your remarks about how to bolt change management onto what seems like an overwhelming topic. And you just emphasized one of the tactics, which is if you're going to do something radically different, have a big tent, have people sit down with you when you're starting to sketch out the idea, rather than springing it upon them when you think it's baked and actually not baked. You haven't included all the stakeholders. What are some of the other change management concepts that you've come across in this role?
Sure. So, and I've had the luxury, when I was at Alexion, I built an incubator, an accelerator for technology. So I was seeing firsthand driving these types of changes within clinical development and within commercial organizations. And one of the things that we've seen, and even learning from them, I think, Ryan, you hit it on the head. You need a big tent. You need to go out and work with the business leaders, work with the organization, understand where they are, what are the jobs to be done, and make it to a degree transparent where you can. I think the other challenge, though, is that sometimes we see organizations that try to do it all at once. And one of the keys here is you need to identify an area of the organization that is willing and ready. You want an army of the willing, if you will, to be able to engage in that first entry into the change. And so what we've seen where it's been more impactful, and actually going back to that modern data use case, was module. So rather than just doing an absolute transformation of their clinical trial management systems and their clinical development systems and flipping a light switch and it all turned over on Saturday night, like we would, you always hear those stories of folks and they do the software upgrades on a Saturday night and people are up for 24 hours and they're just, drinking lots of coffee and losing their minds. You do it incrementally. So the modularization in the modern data strategy was really interesting because it was incrementally, I'm going to start in this part, I'm going to make the changes here, and then it will continue to cascade. So it gives the organization the ability to, one, get a couple of quick wins, which is always critically important. Whenever you create change, those early wins are more important than getting the big showy win at the end. Build the momentum, get a couple of wins under your belt. We see it in commercial, we see it in clinical development all the time. And then once you get momentum, you start to bring more and more people in under the tent. And so it's almost training folks. The other thing that's really interesting is as we were doing this work, you're exposing more and more parts of your organization to the change, and you're giving them time to get comfortable with it. And that's a critical element as well.
That's great advice. It's something that I've screwed up a few times as we built Florence, because a lot of folks that build technology, you get satisfaction in your job from the reveal and the delivery of the value of this thing that you created, right? You feel, you kind of want to be Willy Wonka in a way, like snap your fingers, all of a sudden the chocolate bar is in your pocket. And oh my God, it's amazing. But that totally fucks up enterprise teams that are trying to create predictability in their world. And it's such a tough tension. And in fact, it just happened. Here's an advertisement. We released our first AI capability set in our last release in eBinders, which is an audit trail summary. You saw Jim allude to it during his remarks around TCN and that contracting application yesterday. But every eBinders customer has the ability to turn on in their team settings our first AI agent, which will summarize the audit trail of the document and look for critical issues. So please go try that out. But that I didn't want to roll it out that way. I wanted to just have on. You have to go turn it on when your organization's ready. And in alignment with Doug, that's the right way to do things. So we talked a little bit about change management. The other change that's happening is economic. I built my career in SaaS applications, starting my time at Microsoft and I had another business before Florence, and then the last decade at Florence. And the concept was good SaaS applications help the humans that were doing the work. And generally that meant that about 10% of the total addressable market could go to the SaaS application and 90% would go to the humans doing the work because it was just a helper. Now what we're seeing with agents is the agents are doing the work that the humans were doing. And all of a sudden the agents can, and the companies that are building agents can suggest that they should be entitled to some more value because they're expanding the capacity of the humans doing the work rather than just being little assistants. Are you seeing how companies change the pricing of their services and their go-to-market because of that shift? What's changing in the relationship between the humans and the agents? Well,
it's interesting. So what we see from an industry perspective, we see buyers and we see builders, right? So there are organizations that are still have the capacity internally to build, and then there are organizations who are buying. So, but the reason that we're buying is because I don't have the capabilities to do that work in-house. So we are starting to see change. It's a question that's come up. We haven't seen anything that's been an entire industry-like transition, but it is beginning to happen because ultimately your SaaS applications are doing the work that was being done by a human. So we're starting to see where they're starting to change the model and they're changing the relationship. So it used to be this is the assistant, to your point. Now it's more this is a service. And within the service, there are agents and there's a human in the loop, but it is being more from a agentic perspective. But the service itself is still being built as a service.
Thank you. That helps. To bring us to a close, we're thrilled to announce our partnership with AWS maybe you could comment on, given AWS has deep expertise, tens of thousands of employees that are mega smart about how to deploy new agentic work. What are the qualities that AWS seeks in partners? Why would AWS partner?
So I think AWS, we've built ourselves as a community of builders. So our goal is to bring the cloud and bring the cloud's capabilities to our partners. But we also realize that final mile and that institutional knowledge and that expertise in specific areas, much like Florence has, those are not areas that AWS, we just don't have that level of depth. So we choose partners and organizations that we have identified that we believe can get us the final mile. There are intricacies about the way clinical trials and clinical development occurs across the life cycle. And there are things that Florence, as a partner, has created that benefit and we believe will help us to benefit our partners. So when we establish partnerships much like this that was announced today, it's the reality that we need to be able to assemble the partners that can actually deliver the art of the possible. If we try to do it all by ourselves, these things won't happen. So we need strong partners. And what we want to be able to do is we have an expertise in working across agentic AI and in cloud computing. We want to bring that expertise to a Florence because you have the expertise in clinical trials, and we can actually bridge that and then allow you to accelerate your business.
Well said. So we're lucky to be working right now with one large pharma and one large integrated healthcare system here in the Southeast to create a new way of connecting sites and sponsors with agentic work, or if not yet agentic work, at least large language model interpretation of data. And the other thing that is making that possible is the technical support of AWS. So we not only have infrastructure from AWS, but they've lent us engineers to build those solutions. And we're going to show the release of one of them by the end of November. And that would have taken us well into Q1 if we didn't have your support. So thank you, Doug. Let's have a round of applause for the data and insights we got from Doug. I'd like to invite Catherine Gregor up to the stage.
You're good. You're good. Come on down. Here it goes. Here we go. All right. Good morning. Thanks for hanging with us on day 2. I am excited. My job here at Florence has many perks, one of which is unfettered access to a microphone. But also, I get the opportunity to invite other people and other luminaries in the field to come up and share their knowledge with you. And they're usually people that I've been a little bit of a nerdy fangirl about. So this speaker is no different. I am pleased to announce our next keynote speaker. She is a woman who has been in this field for many years. She started off as a research scientist with an MS in polymer science, which sounds much more complicated than what I went to school for. And quickly from that position went on to do global leadership in a couple different organizations, some names you may have heard of, Thermo Fisher, DuPont, and then eventually went on to become the CEO and president of DIA for 10 years, where she led comprehensive organizational change and digital transformation for that organization. And if that wasn't enough, she spends a lot of time doing board work to help improve other organizations and continue to advance the mission of patient-centered care. And one of the boards that she is on that I was most impressed by was the National Children's Hospital in DC. In her current role today, Barbara is the CEO of Caidya, which is a global CRO. And she is continuing to lead transformation and change both internally and externally in that role. And I'm excited to invite her up to the stage to tell us a little bit about how she has done that and how we can learn from her and hopefully adapt and provide some change for ourselves. Barbara?
So good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I remember about a year ago when Ryan asked me if I would consider coming to the conference. And I had just started as the CEO of Caidya. And a year since, what an adventure it's been. It's a wonderful organization and really thrilled to be leading the transformation of that organization, which, like all of you, is necessary in the world that we're living in. I think the contrast between what you just heard and what I will present is very significant. And so I'm really delighted to take you to a different lens. So first, let me tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in a large family. I'm one of 6. I'm number 3 of 6. How many large families out there? I see hands. Okay, well, you know something about what that feels like. And I remember all of us arriving home from school, book bags in hand, things all over the kitchen table. Our parents were really supportive of education. It was a really top thing in our house. I remember coming home and saying to my dad, I got an A. And he'd be like, where's the A+? It was like, I was expected to do well. We were all expected to do well. We were always challenging each other. My brother is the eldest, 5 girls. He was like the role model for all of us. He first went out to university. And we were always like inquisitive and questioning and building things and doing scientific experiments at home. All of us are scientific on some level. But what I really remember most are those days when my parents would tell us that somebody was sick. Somebody went to the hospital. Somebody was diagnosed with cancer. And it would literally like take the air out of the balloon. The quiet that would happen, the concern. And so I grew up feeling the impact of illness before I had any idea what it was or what we could all do about it. And so I started off in my career in perspectives that really generated a lot of questions. I was always asking, like, why, what, how? And some of the folks that work with me at Caidya, I probably drive most of the people crazy because I'm questioning everything. And we should be questioning everything. If that last speaker, if Doug didn't get us all excited about what's coming, I don't know what would. We are living in a world of massive, massive change. And it's up to all of us to take it forward. But I want to suggest to you that the world that we live in, which is really about bringing cures to patients that are in clinical trials, patients that don't have any idea of what a clinical trial is and how we get them at the table, how we make it so it works for them, how we get our teams, our staff to relate to those new companies out there, those innovators that are bringing the next generation of cures, how we keep everybody inspired in this very complex system that's undergoing change is a critical requirement of all leaders. And I hope that you agree with that. So my background, as Catherine said, I studied polymer science. I was proud of it. I wanted to be a researcher, and I was good at it. But when I was doing that, people were saying to me, oh, you should do this. You should try commercial. You should do all these other things. And so I did. I went through a career where I was a commercial leader. I was a communications leader. I actually was a head of HR when I was at DuPont. Who would have known? I didn't think I knew anything about it. I realized I did. I've done a lot of mergers and acquisitions. I've been in big public companies, small companies, think tanks, private companies. I've been in pharma, biotech, diagnostics, devices. And I will tell you, no matter where you go, the most important thing we do is to lead and to inspire others to question and generate those next innovations. So whether you're sitting anywhere along that trajectory of your career, I want to tell you that leading today is complicated, and we need to make sure that we're preparing people with the courage, with the clarity, and the compassion to take our industry to the next level. So let's look at the clinical development landscape. I laughed a little bit when I saw this research revolution. Are we revolutionizing? Because we need to be. If you look at the organization, we are like the poster child of inefficiency. And thank goodness we're moving in the direction we are moving. We know the data, $2.3 to $2.6 billion to get a single drug to market. I've seen more recent data that has that number around $4 billion, so we're going in the wrong direction. About 80% of the trials fail to meet enrollment deadlines, and those that enter phase 1, only 13% of them actually reach approval. It takes 12 to 15 years to get a new drug to market. If you have anyone who has an illness that has no particular interventions, That's a long time to wait. And if you look at what we do in clinical, out of that 12 to 18 years, it's about 8 or 9 years that a drug is sitting in clinical development. And if you look at companies' R&D spend, about 69% of it goes into the clinical development phase. And then if you look at how we're really servicing patient populations, most companies don't have a good diversity agenda. And this became really clear right during COVID when all the new data came out. And even still, we're working hard to do it, but we're not meeting those diversity goals. If you look at R&D spending, it's up about 44% over the last 10 years. But the number of drugs that have reached approval here in the United States is about 43 on average per year. If you look internationally, that number is about double that. So it's really quite small relative to the investment. So if you think about it, summing it all up, we're investing more, we're waiting longer, and the patients are out there waiting. They're waiting for us to deliver. So I personally think that there's lots of room for improvement. I'm excited about the technology improvements. Those will help, but we have to remember why we're doing what we're doing. So if you look conventionally at how industry has responded to all the challenges, we've tried to do a lot of things. We've invested in risk-based monitoring, adaptive trial designs, basket trial designs, data-driven site optimization, compliance improvements. We tried consolidation. But if you look at that invented response, it's kind of like how we treat disease. There's a symptom, there's a drug. But what we really need is more a holistic approach to the entirety of what we do. So in my mind, we have amazing science coming out. So it's not a failure of the science, it's not a failure of the tech. It's a failure of the system that surrounds everything we do. So we need to open our minds and think holistically from early discovery to post-drug approval. How do we get that all working better? So I want to suggest for all of us who are doing clinical trials that we must think about a new paradigm. We must stop thinking about tactics and thinking about strategy and thinking about how we lead. We must stop thinking about adding tools, and we must think about the entirety of the model. We need a connected, patient-first, people-first redesign, and we need to set up the system so that adaptation is possible as we go through the series of the trials. We need to figure out how to connect up, and I appreciated the comments about change management from Doug. Strategy, process, people, technology, and purpose. And we can't lose the thoughts about why we do what we do. And we need to make sure that the economics that come out of the inventions and the innovations that we're putting in place actually do turn into improved care for patients. So as I think about the CRO model, how do we rethink what we do and move away from being transactional operators and being more product development partners? How do we engage in the conversations with our sponsors to make sure that they're aware that we care about what they do, that we understand what they do? So I want to go through 5 ideas that we are putting in place at Caidya and that we've found are delivering much more beneficial outcomes with the trials that we are doing. So let me talk about collaboration, partner level collaboration. What does this actually look like? So at Caidya, we work with a lot of biotechs globally. And if you look at what's happening in the biotech world, there is an absolute explosion of innovation. The main focal points, the main loci, I think is the right word, of innovation, those are in the United States and in China. Caidya happens to be very well set up to support innovators in both of those countries. When you talk to people who are in that phase of development, people who have started a clinical stage company, a biotech, They own what they do. It is their baby. They may have developed it themselves, or they may have scoured the landscape for a particular indication, and they may have found an interesting entity. It's like they own the drug. It is their life. And so when you approach them, approaching them as if, you co-own it. Put yourself in their shoes and have your team do the same and build that kind of partnership where they know, just like they know. And my daughter, by the way, owns her own business. I've seen how this feels. Like whatever it takes, you're going to make it happen. That's the attitude you need to have. I'll give you an example. We're running a phase 2 cardiology trial with a startup company. And actually, this trial was going on long before I got involved, but it was very interesting how the coordination between Caidya and our sponsor company was going. There was absolute co-ownership in every single discussion that went on. In fact, what I tell people is when I started joining some calls, I couldn't tell who worked for our sponsor and who worked for Caidya because they were so integrated in their project discussions. The executives were involved from the start. We took time to understand exactly what the science of this new indication was, what the clinical trial requirements were going to be, the regulatory strategy, the medical strategy. We put our team forward. We made sure they understood what we wanted to accomplish. We made it very, very clear. I've seen this team work weekends, evenings, when an issue came up to make sure that the sponsor got what they needed. What we did was we had a request from the sponsor to determine whether it was possible for us to accelerate the trial by about 3 months. They wanted to do database lock on 2 aspects of the trial on Valentine's Day. It's a cardiovascular drug. I mean, I thought that was so symbolic. We brought our team together and we said, okay, what do we need to do? How do we do this? And we figured out a pathway forward and we delivered that acceleration. In fact, this client, we have this tagline at Caidya that we adapt at the speed of science. That tagline was created by that client. They've been so impressed with how we've been able to really get into it with them, to give them the sense that we understand, that we own the outcome. And that kind of behavior, that changes the culture of the organization. And I want to just go back to what we talked about probably through this entire conference around the technology, the AI, the agentic AI, everything is coming. That's all great. But at the top of that, there needs to be something more. There needs to be an understanding of the people that we're working with, of the companies that we're working with, and of our staff and what they ultimately need to deliver. I want to talk about agility. I mentioned that Caidya has a particular strength in supporting cross-border trials that originate in China or originate in the US. And if anybody's worked with Chinese biotechs, anyone in the room experience there? I don't see any hands. Okay, well, let me tell you what that's like. If you look at the culture in China, it is like, I wanted it yesterday. It is speed, it is pace, it is quality. They've taught us how to be different. And that agility is really about a mindset change. It sort of partners well with the collaboration discussion I just had. It's the ability to adapt quickly to change. So, an example, we're working with an oncology biotech. They have a really interesting indication. And by the way, you probably have seen a lot of American private equity investors, venture capitalists, big pharma. They're all going to China. They're all licensing the drugs. They're creating partnerships with those companies because they are doing, in some case, better versions of drugs that were generated here. And in other cases, truly novel indications in many, many different therapeutic areas. But this oncology client, biotech startup, they had a really interesting platform. They had a drug that they wanted to take into multiple indications. They presented and built with us a complex basket trial design. And frankly, the strategy was put together in record time. They wanted to get the first patient in as quickly as possible. We had to work around the clock, around the calendar to be able to get this set up and to become very efficient with excellent communication loops. We're still doing that trial today. We're getting very good feedback from the customer. That's not the point, though. The point is that you can only create that kind of agile way of working by pushing the accountability down in organizations. In our company, the organizational structure is extremely flat. What we try to do is ensure that everybody understands goals. We have goals, we have scorecards, we have metrics, and people also understand that sometimes when you push accountability down, people have to make quick decisions. Sometimes they fail. So another part of the culture that I want to talk about is this idea of blameless learning. Blameless learning. What I tell people is if we're moving fast enough, if we're innovating as we need to, we are going to make mistakes. But what I expect is don't make the same mistake twice. Learn from it. Learn from it. And if you're going to be in the world of biotech innovation, you cannot avoid what's going on in China. And I understand the geopolitics, very clear on that. I understand the data architecture and the privacy requirements by our government and the Chinese government. We need to figure out ways to work with that. So what I would say is the idea that being agile is a key part of what we need to do going forward has been built into how we're thinking by these very companies in China that we work with. The next point, I really want to emphasize this because I always worry when I hear people talking about AI and technology and all of that, that we forgot that actually the patients are out there waiting. And I'll confess that when I took the reins at DIA, I'd come from a very large research company, and we were doing a lot of innovation in medical devices and in drugs and across the board. And I actually thought I knew what patients wanted. I mean, I really thought that I understood that. And I can tell you that I couldn't have been farther off the mark. We don't know what it's like living with a disease unless you've had it. And if you think you can read a list of symptoms and design a new drug or design a new medical device, please think again. So we need to think a lot more about the patients and how we bring them into the world of our clinical trial industry. Even today, with all the work that's gone on to try to bring patients into what we do, only about 5% of people who have cancer participate in clinical trials, 5%. And when you think about diversity, less than 10% of companies actually have a diversity action plan. So in my mind, we need to think very carefully, especially as we're going through so much transformational change, how we bring patients in early, how we get patients involved in setting up protocols. How do we simplify the logistics? How do we make it so patients stay in the trials, understand the data that's coming from all the tools and techniques that we're putting in place? How do we make sure that the communication loop is strong to the patient, I've seen a lot of discussion on the topics of technology and AI, but I don't hear much about how that really brings patients and the sort of sentiment of patients and families dealing with disease. How are we making sure that we're keeping them in our conversation? We have a lot of examples of how we brought patients in, how we save lives, and things that we do at Caidya. I won't give you all of those, but I'm sure you have them as well. I just want to make sure that as we go forward, we're training our patients to understand what they're going to see and get them more involved in their clinical trials. Global access, this is very important. Of course, if you're going to do multi-regional trials, you need to have access to partners around the globe or to have staff around the globe for putting products through the regulatory paradigm. I want to also say that please remember that when you have people around the globe, it gives you an opportunity to meet broad diversity goals by looking at patients across the globe and ensuring that your trial statistics meet some reasonable replica of the population diversity. I also want to say that in doing rare disease trials, having global access allows you to have access to patients around the globe that perhaps wouldn't be considered in our traditional way of thinking. In rare diseases, we tend to do patient recruitment through a Western mindset. But we have found, for example, in one trial that's represented on this slide, that by looking at the patient population around the world in rare diseases, we've been able to speed up our patient recruitment about double the pace. In this particular indication, this is a particular form of fibrodysplasia. It's called Stone Man's disease. It unfortunately occurs in children. The patients are very difficult to find. We were able to double our recruitment rate by looking broadly across Asia and finding patients that unfortunately have this disease. So I want to emphasize that when we think about global participation, it's not just about global for regulatory. There are many other ways of using our positioning. It actually helps us to have a patient-first approach, to have an inclusive mindset, and to also get the acceleration that we need. And then finally, I'm not going to talk much to this group about all the benefits of having AI and real-world data and what we're doing going forward. What I want to say is that in order to lead, incorporating technology and the elements that I talked about, which are really the human side of what we do, leadership is important. We must have data, competent, innovative leaders that also understand that what we're doing involves a very, very important human side. And I think if we lose sight of that, we're going to lose sight of the patients that we would like to have that become all that data that's the bottom of the iceberg that we just saw in that last slide. So just to summarize, I think the future of therapeutic development is really rich. There's an incredible amount of technology coming through, thankfully. Some of the things that we suffer with, the diseases we suffer with today, probably in 10 years, we're going to say, you know, that no longer is an issue. But we need to stay at it. We need functional depth plus human characteristics. We need understanding. We need data fluent, adaptive leaders. So we need to balance the speed, the technology with the human side of what we do. We need to make sure that we're growing leaders that understand the future of our industry. Let's not get so deep into the science of the data and the technology that we forget that it's a patient on the other side who's sitting there with their family, anxiously waiting the outcome of some diagnostic tests that they just went through. And so I feel like, you know, together, we really are the architects of what comes next. I think the answers are in this room. I've heard many of you talking about what's happening in science and technology. I know that you understand what the mission is here. So I want to encourage us all to lead together across the entirety of industry, regulators, patients, payers, advocates, industry. Let's think about the totality of the ecosystem, and let's get the improvements in place that we want. But let's do it making sure that we realize that the human needs to be in the loop. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. All right. Thank you for that very illustrative talk. There was a couple things. I have a couple questions that I had planned ahead of time, and then I wrote down too while you were talking. So hopefully you're good going a little off script with me.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, but before we get started, I wanted to talk about one of the first concepts you open with around transactional relationships. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I used to work at a site, and it was easy for me back then to say, nobody at a sponsor or CRO knows what it means to be at a site. They don't know me. They don't know my pain. Now I sit in a position between all three of those entities, and I can say that we all clearly don't understand each other's pain sometimes. We get so caught in our own discomfort that we're focused on solving our problem that we forget to look up and solve the bigger ones. So I know that you focused a lot on transactional, improving relationships between sponsors and CROs. Can you give advice to the room on how we can do that as a whole across all three stakeholders so that we can understand each other, innovate better, and ultimately better serve the biggest stakeholder, which is the patients?
Right. Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's a really important question. And you use the word transactional.
Yeah.
And when I came into this role, I actually said, as somebody who always asks a lot of questions and tries to drive innovation, the regulators have done us no service because they've given us a recipe. You got to do this, you bring it in, yes, go back, do more. So we have kind of fallen into that kind of transactional and recipe-like way of thinking, I think, on some level. And that's my perspective coming into the industry a year ago as a new CEO and a CRO. I think that everybody should be asking those questions. I mean, I actually have a family member right now going through a clinical trial at MD Anderson, and I can tell you that the whole family is kind of like waiting, right? Like, what's going on? And MD Anderson is probably one of the best in the United States. I mean, they're being treated very well, but still, that transactional relationship has kind of come home to roost with waiting too long, not understanding results, all the things that happen. So how do we fix that? We fix that by just remembering, right? We just keep in mind that we're all here for a particular reason. The patient is really out there suffering. They're giving us their data. They're filling up our big iceberg, right?
Right.
But we need to just make sure that everybody is trained to be aware of the end game. And I think, really when I say that, it's really about the people in our organizations and whether or not we talk about that. Are we talking to our staff about mission, about purpose, about why we come to work every day? Are we celebrating whenever we achieve an outcome? Like I mentioned, this particular cardiovascular trial, it had incredible results. And little did I know there were so many people out there suffering with the particular illness until I came into this particular trial opportunity. But are we celebrating? Are we communicating? I can tell you at Caidya, I love this about the company. We actually do an awards ceremony every year. It's kind of like the Oscars. And what we do is we have people nominate the individuals that actually represented our values the best.
Right.
And the whole globe, everybody around the world is tuned in, and it's a big deal. Everybody gets a plaque. I think it's very sweet that they put it on LinkedIn, like I was the person who represented, liberating knowledge best. And so you have to kind of make a part of what you do.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to emphasize it, because I feel like we're turning what we do into a bunch of data and forgetting the rest of it.
Excellent. We also, ironically, have implemented a program where we are celebrating employees who embody our values. We don't have a clever name for it yet, but I think we should definitely play on the Oscars theme. So somebody write that down, Nisha. Formalware next quarter. But you're right? It is hard our jobs are hard. We work in a hard space. Sometimes we're dealing with situations that are not happy, right? We have patients in front of us who need care. We have timelines that need to be met, and we are not always able to do that. And that's just comforting. So it's important to celebrate those moments when you can,
Yes.
right? And to make those very loud, because that's how you keep going. So thank you for that. The other thing that you mentioned that I found interesting was this culture of agility. So we've been talking a lot, both yesterday with Dr. Caliph and then throughout most of the panels I've heard or had the opportunity to sit in on, is that change is constant, right? It's always there. What's changing now in our industry is that change is happening faster than ever,
That's
right? The innovation is coming, and it's coming at a faster pace. And so I know that I have teams sometimes where it feels like we can get change fatigue, right? Like we don't know how to find the normal because it's always something new. What tactical advice could you give to leaders in the room today of how to start to build that culture of agility within their teams? Like what has to be foundational and what is good to continually reinforce to move that way?
Yeah, this is a very important question. I mean, change fatigue is real. I think we need to just make sure that we back up every once in a while and remind people why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we putting this change in place? What's the ultimate end game for whatever part of the ecosystem we reside in, and give people time to take a break. I mean, give people a chance to go and defrag. I mean, we happen to be a completely virtual company. And by the way, I don't know if anybody else has the pleasure of doing that, but it's so amazing to have, we have offices in, 20 countries or something, but people really, I encourage people, even the executives, I can tell, I'll be like, just go, turn off, go and defrag, go and relax and take time. But I do think that the most important thing has to do with making sure when we communicate, we're clear about why we're doing what we're doing. And of course, it's really critical, but it's also about staff. It's about them. It's about leadership. It's about why we come to work every day. It's about why, I see people working on Labor Day weekend. Like, why are people doing that? Because they care about the fact that this database lock is going to happen and these patients who don't have any other alternative therapy are going to get something. So talking about it in human terms and reminding people why we do what we do and trying to turn that, feeling of checking the box, getting the data, try to turn that into something bigger, expand the lens on it.
Yeah, that is great advice. And I like also that you talked in there a little bit of what we call putting the mask on yourself first, right? It's the airline theme, that sometimes we get so caught up in trying to serve the job, the patients, that we forget to serve ourselves.
Yes.
And so when you don't show up to work as, 100% yourself, you're actually not providing the service that you need. So taking time to recenter, I think, is important. And I think that's a cultural change for a lot of people. I know when I was in head deep in the cancer world, that just would never occur to me, right? Like, I took phone calls at all hours. I was working all weekends because at the end of the day, you just know there's patients waiting. Yeah. But I got so burned out that I just wasn't able to show up to be effective anymore. And so somebody had to tell me, you need to take a week off and then come back.
I think as leaders, seeing it and asking the questions, how are you doing? Yeah. You look exhausted. Why don't you go take the day off? Why don't you go and do something? If a family member, we just had recently people going to parents' weekends and go and turn it off. This will be here when you come back, and giving people the comfort to do. I do it too, by the way.
Yeah.
Little secret. I block my calendar every Friday afternoon. I just block it. And I've learned that, for me to go into the weekend, to have a few hours to kind of like just reorganize myself, get a few things done so that I can go to my Friday night and feel like there's no burning things going on. I just do that. I mean, on occasion, people will say, are you free? And I'll take a meeting block. Give people, be open about it. Like, if CEO's doing that, well, I can do it too. I'm totally transparent about what I do when I'm away.
Yeah, that's great advice. Also, is like leading by example and being very forthcoming about the reality of work, especially as a leader, I think is important. In that notion around agility and giving yourself permission, there was a concept, or English, giving yourself permission to reset because you messed up that question. We are patient driven. We are a mission driven organization. And we talk about patient centricity all the time, right? We want to do what's best for the patient. We want to design trials for the patients. We want to make sure that the process is as seamless as possible for the patient. But Dr. Caleb and I were up here the other day, and he made a statement that was funny, but also incredibly true. We talk about being patient-centric in our healthcare system, but have you tried to get an appointment with your doctor, right? Like, it's complicated. So what advice can you give to the room about how do we start to actually move towards patient centricity in a way that feels real to the patient on the other end of it? Because we know we see it every day. Our heads are down and we see that we're making progress. It's better because we've been in the granular details for so long, but patients may not see that change because they're still just trying to get an appointment.
Right. I think that's I'm sorry I missed Rob's comment because that would have made me laugh as well. And I don't think it's going to get any better, by the way, with physician shortages. But I think the most important thing is when patients who are coming into a trial, seeing a doctor, they understand that they have a disease. They don't expect magically it's going to go away. But the most important thing that we could do better with is being clear with them about what they're experiencing, what their options are, guiding them a bit through the clinical trial, giving them clear feedback about what they're seeing, what you're seeing with their disease, so that they know how to live their life. I mean, that's all they want. They don't want to participate or understand data or be involved in the trial other than how it affects them. And I really believe that, I I actually say this frequently to my own kids and my husband. All problems in the world have to do with communication. I think that we could do a much better job as an industry just figuring out in our clinical trial plan, what are we telling the patients? When are we telling the patients? How are we bringing them in? And I think that's an opportunity for all of us to really think about.
Yeah, I can't tell you the most eye-opening experience I've had having worked in healthcare for 20 years was when I had a friend who was diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer, and my daughter ended up having to go in to have corrective surgery as a child. And being in the other end of it and seeing the communication on the other side of it, I felt lucky in that I know enough to question and to push, but not everybody knows that. But also, even when I did question and push, the answers I got back sometimes weren't complete. And how frustrating that must feel, and how overwhelming that it feels to somebody. In that moment, you were powerless. I was not the director of a cancer center. I was not an important person at the hospital where my daughter was being seen. I was a parent. And that feels powerless. And that is hard to deal with.
Absolutely. I think if all of us just put communication up our list a bit more and talked about it more, we could infect other people to do the same. So I really think that it's critical that we remember the soft side of what we do.
Excellent. And there was one more thing I wanted to call out that you said that I just loved, because Rob touched on it too, was around psychological safety, right? He talked about the 483 isn't meant to be punitive, that it's an opportunity for improvement. And I joke, well, I used to use it like a hammer with my physicians to scare them, like the boogeyman. And he's like, but it shouldn't be that way. It is an opportunity to show how you can do better. And the fact that we're so afraid of error and afraid of that 483 or that kappa observation prevents us from actually being honest and getting better. So we have to move past the fear. How do you create psychological safety for your organization?
Yeah, I have to say that when you said 483, I too kind of had like
right. It's like a gut check. You're like, oh God.
Not one of those. I come from a background where I have really, first of all, I love innovation. I want to work in organizations that think innovatively. I personally believe that it's like innovate or die. I think if you're not moving forward, there's really no future. And so I'm pretty comfortable with making mistakes. I've made my share. I always tell people that's my best learning experiences personally as a researcher or a leader or an executive. Those have been my best learning experiences. And so I tell people, if you have an idea, try it out. If it doesn't work, don't feel bad about it. Move on. Just don't do it again. I mean, a blameless culture is very, very hard to create. And I can say that at Caidya, we're not perfect by any stretch. But I have really tried to role model that myself. I certainly have made mistakes since I've been in that job. It's pretty visible when the CEO does that. I'll pull it back and say, yep, thanks. That was good learning. Understand, off I go. Just, you need to just make sure that if you see it happening, that you call it out and call it out in the right way, not attacking the person. That only will make them more sensitive to it, but talk about it. If you learn from them. I put new tracks because we do lose them. I'm sure everybody does from time to time. We no longer call them win-loss. We call it win-learn. And that way it sort of puts the emphasis on taking the feedback from the client, taking some action. I'm very engineering minded. I like to have actions, KPIs and all of that. And making sure we just, next time we have one, we change that. We don't make that mistake again. Off we go. Done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that win-learn. I'm going to change our Salesforce database tomorrow. But yeah, it's right. Because in order for us to go faster, we have to be less afraid of the pothole in the road, because we will hit them. We have to move forward with intention so that we don't hit as many potholes as we can. But when they do show up, be okay and learn from it. So thank you.
With AI coming, there's going to be lots of opportunities for learning.
So much. I've learned 5 new words since sitting here this morning.
Yeah, that's really excellent.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening.
All right. So now, speaking of learning on the fly, I have a script. on my phone that I'm supposed to close the session out with. First of all, thank you for joining us this morning. I know it is hard to get up early and come to a conference on a Tuesday, especially after you may have been out and having a grand time in the silent disco. Also, thank you for participating in the silent disco and going into a new experience. So this is the close of the formal session in this room. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break, go out, get some coffee, visit our partners in the exhibitor hall, talk to our product teams in some of the sessions. We are going to come back here at 10:10 with the session for the first breakout session in this room will be accelerating studies through integrated technology ecosystems, and that'll be here in Ellington. There are several other sessions happening in the Mercer ballrooms as well. Please check your app and see where you want to go. And also at 10:55, we will have WCG's Innovation Showcase in this room, so please join them. They have some exciting things to talk about innovation in terms of IRB. And then we will have lunch at 12:30 in the big room over here on the side. So thank you.